water,
using the toilet, touching raw meat, handling pets and livestock, playing outdoors, cleaning or handling waste and garbage.
wash your hands, wash them often.
You are going right when you make a habit of washing your hands several times a day.
This message brought to you courtesy the Bureau of Health Education of the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
Hi, good evening. Welcome to the studios of the Government Information Service. My name is Titus Previll. I am here with a panel of experts to discuss this evening a number of issues that impact the economy in this situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to take a look at some of the critical issues as far as the economy is concerned, and how do we go forward? What are the signals we've learned so far, and how do we go forward? We also want to reflect, as is understandable. We heard Prime Minister Honorable Alan Shastney just a while ago deliver an address to the nation in which he highlighted some of the policy decisions that he will be taking in the next few months, as we see a gradual opening up of the economy, for instance, and some other measures. Well, to discuss the Prime Minister's address this evening and other issues that impact the economy in this COVID environment and beyond, I have with me here in the studios at GIS a panel of experts, as I indicated, and I would start with, to my extreme right, to introduce a gentleman by the name of Richard Peterkin. Mr. Peterkin is a chartered accountant with Grant Thornton. And next to him is Ms. Wendy Delmar. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Associations of Banks Incorporated. And next to Wendy is Mr. Janai Leons. He is the Chief Economist in the Ministry of Finance. And to my left is Ms. Paula James. She is the Executive Director of the Saint Lucia Manufacturers Association. And to Ms. James's left is Dr. Thomas Samuel. He's a Director of International Trade in the government of Saint Lucia. Panelists, welcome to this program this evening. I believe it has been promoted widely, and the audience expect, I believe, some very robust discussion on the topics before us. Prime Minister just addressed the nation. He spoke to some issues and situations and challenges that the country face as we move through different stages of the COVID-19. I'd start with you, Richard. Anything from his address that has struck you in any particular way that you'd like to give an initial comment on?
Well, there were not a lot of new announcements because he's been talking to various bodies over the last week, and I think we got a good sense as to where we would be going. The good news, of course, was that things seem to be going well on the virus front, and they're doing a great job, handling that. So I think he was now getting into some of the other issues regarding the economy, and he touched on certain hot button issues like, the salaries for civil servants, and the phased reopening of the economy, and the fact that it'll take a little while. Plus, he gave some indication of government finances and the difficulties there. So there will be stuff in there. People will be glad to see that now certain things like I think barbers and hairdressers might now be open, and they've been calling for that for some time.
Yes.
And I'll let others give their comments. My only disappointment is the fact that he did not relaxed the liquor license provisions, which would have allowed me to buy more bottles of wine.
I think some people need some form of relaxation, so I suspect at home, not necessarily in a retail shop, in a refreshment shop, but at home perhaps. Janai, you are in the Ministry of Finance as a chief economist there. You would have perhaps had, you have more insight into the situation than us in terms of the finances of the economy. Anything the Prime Minister said there that you think you would like to highlight and draw to the public's attention?
I think what the Department of Finance and the government of Saint Lucia would like the public to know is that the different agencies of government are working towards ensuring that a lot of the issues that we face in terms of the reduced revenues and whatnot, we are working with our development partners, whether it be the IMF, whether it be the ECCB, whether it be the Caribbean Development Bank, to lend their support to the government. The banking sector as well has been gracious in lending some of their support, and we will continue to work with those actors to get us out of this and to also rebound and come back stronger, as some persons are saying.
The private sector is, I'm sure, paying close attention, Ms. James, to the announcements made by the Prime Minister. They take the cue from it, the manufacturing sector in particular. Anything here tonight that is encouraging to you?
Well, the fact that more sectors are beginning to open up a bit, I am happy to see some of that. I just want them to ensure that the protocols that need to be established are maintained, because that will still keep us with the social distancing and a lot safer. But I think the more businesses you can open as the time progresses, it will start the circulation of income. And I think this is what the government is really looking for, because taxes right now is almost zero for them as collection.
Any comments, Wendy?
Well, certainly on the banking side, I think that what has been encouraging is that there has been tremendous response, not only in Saint Lucia, as I represent the Caribbean, but whenever called upon, we've recognized that the banks have really stepped up to the plate. Offering carte blanche moratoriums was one of the significant moves on the bank's part, as there is a direct impact to the operations of the banking sector as a result. So I think from that standpoint, we're happy to see that all sectors are coming together, understanding that this is unseen and unprecedented times, and trying to find the resolve that works best for our people.
Unprecedented times, indeed. Richard, what is the closest situation that comes to your mind? I'm not taking advantage of the fact that you perhaps might be the one with the most experience.
The oldest, you mean?
What situation comes closest that, in your experience, what you've read, to the situation that Saint Lucia and the world faces now with COVID-19?
You know, on a global scale, there have been lots of other disasters and pandemics. I mean, you had the Spanish flu of 1820, and that killed 500 million people. I mean, sometimes we forget. We had World Wars I and II, the Great Depression, which was one of the worst economic downturns in the history of the world. Asian flu, the AIDS pandemic, that killed 35 million over a series of years. 9/11, SARS, H1N1, Ebola, etc. These were all a number of them. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, however, will herald the worst economic contraction in the history of Latin America. So I'm talking about our region here rather than the rest of the world, and the Caribbean, with a projected 5.3% drop in activity this year. Now, that's just the region as a whole, but for us, they're projecting, I think, 18%. And so, just to tell you, ECLAC was the one who just recently came up with that report. So it shows you that even the Great Depression, the contraction there was just 5%. So right away that suggests to you that while the pandemic may not, unfortunately, kill as many people as the Spanish flu, the economic impact may be greater. Now, I've only lived in Saint Lucia for 43 years, so I'm not that familiar with the economic history. So in terms of the greatest shocks to Saint Lucia, I'm familiar with, obviously, Hurricane Allen in 1980, and I'm not referring to our Prime Minister here, right? So just to be sure. He was only 20 at that point in time. And the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York. Both of them affected our economy. 9/11 for, I think, a week or more, there were no flights, no tourists. But both of them, had a much shorter time frame, and so it didn't really have the same impact that this one is. So it's no question that even though we're fortunate not to have the same number of deaths as some of the earlier pandemics had, this will be the greatest economic shock to us in the history of the country, the region, maybe even the world.
So when you look at what in terms of the projections for growth or lack thereof, and you look at the structure of our economy, what do you see? What are the major constraints you see that will impact us as we try to move out of this situation?
It's not easy to forecast or to prepare for global shocks like this one. Nobody saw it coming, not in the whole world. But in order to prepare for shocks generally, we need to keep our institutions strong. We need to keep our finances healthy, and and other ways that we can build resilience so we can deal with shocks one way or another, whether it be a natural disaster or pandemic. Speaking generally, we need to ensure that, like, for example, our educational, agricultural, or health or security sectors are always strong and vibrant. So we can know what has to be done. We have the food security, so we don't have to worry about what we're going to eat for months to come. We have health to take care of our people, and in fact we had to build up. We weren't ready for that, and it took us a little while to get to that. And there are going to be lots of stresses that we're just not ready for, but we're certainly working on. So you need to have a flexible as well and legitimate political system which allows us to quickly and efficiently make the logistical and legal changes to address the challenges and mitigate the risks, as well as assure greater credibility and acceptance of regulations that may temporarily restrict our constitutional rights and freedoms. One of the problems we've had is a number of measures that were announced under the social stabilization. They had to make decisions on the fly. I think we all have to understand that. And so certain things that were decided, that were put out there, the institutions weren't ready necessarily. And so you had a bit of a problem. Like everything in life, after a few days it begins to sort itself out. But to the extent to which we have ourselves ready to deal with things like that is one of the lessons that we need to learn. Strengthening our resilience from potential shocks and longer term challenges. For example, even global warming is a long-term challenge. By building and maintaining infrastructure, managing our resources, and building our reserves to mitigate and last but not least, ensuring that our political, with your political and social and economic policies, that we have a society that is educated, equal to the extent that that is possible, and fair, so that our vulnerable citizens and those that fall off the economic ladder have the social safety nets to keep them healthy and financial and capable of looking after themselves. If we had, for example, and I know how difficult it might have been, unemployment insurance, then that could have come into play to deal with certain aspects. But as I say, these are the things, or some of the things, that we need to have or should have had that would have helped us to overcome this and other shocks.
Yeah. In fact, you mentioned unemployment insurance, and this is something that, we had some rather difficult times in terms of the hurricanes before, and we never actually got around to getting as fundamental a matter as unemployment insurance in place. So this is really a lesson that we cannot not learn from this situation. I want to turn to Dr. Samuel, since you have not had a say on the panel up to this point. Given the projections that we're hearing in terms of rates of growth of order of negative 18%, what do you see as some of the peculiarities in our economic structure that is or has perhaps exacerbated the situation we're faced with? And what would you say would be some of the measures we need to begin to think through and take to restructure ourselves?
Okay, good evening to everyone and fellow panelists, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. The fact is, we are a set of SIDS, and SIDS have certain unique features or characteristics that somewhat can affect or provide some limitations to their ability to handle these shocks. And the main problem is really one of scale, size, and narrowness, and that creates a certain vulnerability, and that is where the crux of the challenge is. So that peculiarity necessitates a sort of response. A rational response would be like, how do you scale up? And the best way to scale up would be through pooling and through integration. And that's why regional integration presents the best and most rational response for small states such as ours with our peculiarities to face global shocks. Okay, because we suffer from what we say in economics as the diseconomies of size, and what that means in terms of our cost of operating and so on. So in the case of issues that you mentioned, we have a number of common challenges. Most of the islands have fiscal challenges, high indebtedness, slow rates of growth, high unemployment. That is almost a common sort of dashboard, macro picture that you can see. But with pooling, as we see, and we have some examples of success in this regard, such as the central bank arrangement and our monetary or currency arrangements. That has served us well in a lot of dividends. And I think we should continue to build on the institutions that we have at the regional level to find answers, to set up the sort of institutional frameworks to buffer against external shocks. And one of the things we can do, as you indicated in your comments just now, was to deal with smoothing out consumptions when we have dislocation from such as unemployment. And that's where the role of either a regional unemployment fund, such as the economic stabilization or whatever name you want to call it, disaster fund, to help countries deal with the dislocation associated with shocks. And we can think of how to capitalize that in terms of the role of our FI, international financial institutions, our donor friends, CDB, and even the private sectors of the region, also the OCS Business Council and so on, getting involved in being part of the solution. Because, again, as you indicated, the limitations of size, the small populations, and we need to build critical mass to find viable responses to these challenges.
I'll turn back to you now. Dr. Sabel mentioned the whole issue of pooling as a form of building resilience to counteract our vulnerabilities, as it were. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and we are part of a currency union, given the structure of our economies, most of them in the ECCU are services-based, tourism-based, and they're all going to go through, are going through a similar situation right now. Are there any serious implications for our reserves, one? Yeah. Two, capacity to generate foreign exchange, and the implication for matters such as your balance of payments, currency stabilization? What does the picture look like?
Thanks. I think that's an excellent question. One of the issues that has come up in the discussions with respect to how can the ECCB assist the ECCU members has been the extent to which some of the, what do you call it, the backing ratio. Right now our currency is back almost 100%. The extent to which some of that can be used to actually finance some of the reduced revenues and whatnot that you are seeing. There were quite a bit of discussions on that. I believe the approach that the ECCB has taken is to really increase some of the overdraft facilities available to member states. So the long-term tranche has been increased. In the case of Saint Lucia, we have benefited from that. And the ECCB has also lowered its discount rate from 6.5% thereabout to as low as 2%. So I think the ECCB recognizes that in this environment of depressed revenues, the islands would need a source of financing to treat some of the issues that they will face. And to that end, they have increased some of their lending facilities and lowered the cost of accessing some of those lending facilities as well. But you are definitely correct, and I take Dr. Sandler's point that pooling is definitely something that needs to be considered, and the extent to which a fund can be capitalized to treat with shocks like this is definitely one of the long to medium term issues that would have to increasingly come to the fore.
What about our balance of payments? How do we look? there are concerns with respect to stability of our currencies. Do you see that as an issue? I mean, you can't see the future. We don't know how long this is, but reasonable estimates.
One of the things working for the region now is the fact that we have been quite prudent in terms of how the currency has been managed. So even in this environment where you are seeing a virtual stop in terms of foreign exchange coming in, the currency, given that it's backed 100%, is quite robust, and we would be able to withstand that shock. So this does bring to the fore one of the benefits of pooling and working together as a region. By all accounts, this is still early days. We have at least a 12 to 18 month period where this COVID-19 is going to play itself out. And I believe the ECCD is working with other regional partners, international partners, to build more substantive and sustainable responses going forward. But one of their first responses was to increase the level of access to member countries and to lower the cost of that access as a first response. And we expect over the medium term to develop and build out more robust responses going on.
Since we're still speaking about the banks and the banking sector, Wendy, I want to come to you because we see that the banks have responded almost very, very early with respect to their coming on board and offering the various moratoria, payments on prepayment of interest and capital and principal on their loans. But as we go forward and the private sector would want to begin to rebuild, the need for financing would be critical. Are the banks considering what this outlook would look like, meaning the need for perhaps more development type financing as opposed to commercial financing as small businesses begin to restructure and reposition themselves? What is the thinking? Do you see that as a place that the banks would want to go?
I think at this present period, the overarching priority for the banks really has been to provide the support to current clients. And so, like you rightly said, the moratorium was the first thing that the banks all came together and decided upon. Initially, the discussion was really around empowering the persons or entities who would have been most immediately impacted by COVID, and those would have been the hotel industry. However, it was absolutely necessary to take a full and broad overview to see exactly who are the partners who are impacted: taxi drivers, not only hotel workers, farmers, everyone. And I think that in hindsight, perhaps the banks will now need to be in a position where they reassess their positions, reassess their own internal policies, and certainly from an IFRS perspective, capitalizing as well as ensuring that they are taking a long-term look at exactly what it is going to mean to their bottom line and to their ability to continue to operate as financially viable institutions. You would appreciate that with the exiting of the international banks, we are now reliant primarily on our own indigenous banks, and they too would have their own challenges. So I think it is difficult, as we have said, to make a determination at this point as to how long this is likely to go on for and what are the immediate impacts going to be. However, if we were to look at, for example, First National Bank, they would have introduced their microfinance department. So I don't think it's far-fetched to assume that the banks will make the necessary adjustments to their policies to ensure that they are in a position to support our local businesses for success going forward.
Exposure. Again, when you look at the structure of these economies, they are all pretty much similar in terms of reliant on one dominant sector. And given the nature of what has happened, a number of businesses that actually would have borrowed from the banks hold themselves tied to that lead key sector of tourism. What is the situation of exposure with the banks?
Well, it's difficult to say from one entity to the next. I think undeniably, given that they're looking at the 6-month moratoriums, and that at this point it is difficult to assess income, and thereby it presents its own challenge in being able to offer loans, that the banks really do have to look at their liquidities. they have to reassess their portfolios in order to make qualified determinations as to the way forward. I know that the ECCB, like Janai mentioned earlier, has been working on relaxing a lot of the requirements, policy and regulatory requirements for the banking sector. But again, given the size of the portfolios that would have been directly impacted as a result of COVID, it certainly puts the banks in a position where they need to step back and take a proper reassessment of their policies, their procedures, and their portfolios to make qualified determinations as to how best they can continue to support the economic structures of the islands.
And Paula, Ms. James, I come to you now because the situation has, I guess, brought to the fore and has exposed our vulnerability. Narrowness of the economic base, serious dependence on one's key sector. What is the role of manufacturing in this environment? What do you see? Is there a future for manufacturing, and what role can it play right now?
Oh, there's a huge future for manufacturing right now. Huge. Because I strongly believe that the sector, along with maybe construction, may have to take the brunt of trying to rejuvenate the economy. And saying so, when I looked at what's happening right now, I looked at the US just last week, and almost 6 of their largest processing plants are shut down.
That's what, poultry?
4 was poultry, 1 was pork, 1 was beef. And I mean, they're huge. And then I looked at Canada, had an issue with potatoes, Irish potatoes, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is coming more to the fore with food security, because we now really have to seriously look at our farmers, our manufacturers, our producers, even our service providers, because we have actually seen just like that. We have a fantastic delivery sector that has just kicked in with a service, because everybody had a Facebook and a phone number. Pack my fruits, pack my juice, I will deliver, pack my bread. So you have a service that just came up without any planning, no discussion, and that has kicked in. So that's a small entrepreneur. And I'm seeing more and more food security is becoming a big challenge for us to look at and ensure that we can, and we do have the ability to. We just have to make sure we monitor every sector to ensure that what is happening, and we stay in touch with government and the different agencies, the different departments, to ensure that they're monitoring where we are and what's happening. Because it is going to open a wider door for manufacturing and the farming sector.
Now, we're discussing this, and there are no sacred cows in here, because we're talking about the future of our country and what needs to be done now, because the seriousness of the situation is that there are a number of persons out of work right now. Many people are living in a very difficult situation. So the immediate question, Paula, is government doing, has governments current, past, further in the past, has enough been done to support the manufacturing sector?
Well, I must say we work very closely with the government, irrelevant which government, and we continue to do that. We have regular meetings with them because they are our partners, and we have to work with them so that we can move. Because as you appreciate, government doesn't have anything to raise revenue. It's my taxes, your taxes, the business community. That's who funds the government. So we must meet with them and have a discussion. And having a discussion, we are partners, so we have to work together and work very closely. This has just brought to the fore how much we really have to work even closer to achieve where we're going and how to start rejuvenating the economy, because it will be a long haul. We are up for the challenge, but I think the manufacturers and the farmers can provide. We just need to make sure we stay in touch and do what we have to do to ensure, and I'm sure government will do this, that we can supply and that we are able to do what we have to.
We're due for a break now, but when we come back, I want to come to you, Dr. Samuel, for us to look at what other issues along what Ms. James has outlined that you would like to pitch in. And Richard, I want to come to you also when we come back to look at the whole issue of diversifying this economic base. What directions can we go? Good evening. This is a program from the Government Information Service. It is a live program. We're discussing the economy in the face of COVID-19 and what happens next. So we are due for a break now, and we will be back on the other side of this break to continue our discussions. Welcome back to this program from the studios of the Government Information Service. We have a panel in studio discussing the situation of the economy of Saint Lucia in the context of COVID-19, the current situation, and how do we go forward. Before the break, Paula James, who is the Executive Director of the Saint Lucia Manufacturers Association, was making the point that now more than ever is the time for the manufacturing sector to step up to be part of the critical engine to restructure this economy, along with construction. And Dr. Samuel, you wanted to weigh in on that point, I believe.
Well, certainly. I think one of the lessons that jumps out at us from this current pandemic shock is the peril or the what is unwise about having over-reliance on one particular lead sector. There's a concept in economics called Dutch disease, you know, where you have a sort of, you develop one sector and there is a commensurate decline, or you neglect other sectors. And we're not saying that is the case, but we're saying that there is need, from a survival standpoint, for strategic reasons, that we must of necessity have a more balanced economy that does not depend overly so on one, because of the likelihood of being exposed, as you used that word earlier on, to a shock like this. And that makes the case, what do we go into? Manufacturing presents perhaps one of the best options with agriculture. And we must not forget agriculture. Food security, our ability to feed ourselves. You just indicated earlier on, there are a number of businesses that are going under in our main source markets, in the US and elsewhere. What happens? We must have alternatives, and that's why we must have some supply capacity in our own territories or nearby in the OECR sub-region in the first instance. We have seen what has happened with especially things like poultry, as you indicated. We have to have some capacity on island to give us some time to, if in case there is such an outbreak. Now this one is all about a virus affecting people, but earlier on we had the one affecting animals. And that is another thing that we need to remember, and in how we structure and configure our arrangements. So the strong lesson is economic diversification. Now, before we had, in the 60s, 70s, we had what was called import substitution policies. And that was frowned upon by various, proponents of the new paradigm that succeeded that, which is trade liberalization and openness. Now, two things can be true at the same time. And as I say, the truth changes every 2 hours. but the point is, it doesn't mean we tend to think of things as one or the other in a sort of a binary sense. But it can both be relevant. And that's why a more balanced approach, I believe, should underpin our trade policies and how we configure our institutions, which makes the case for a more aggressive push in manufacturing. Of course, having regard to SPS and TBT considerations and matters of international competitiveness. But that said, we have to give a greater effort to push the development of manufacturing and agriculture.
So now is a good time, for instance, for our poultry sector to be placed at the forefront. Not because you hear Paul, I'm saying that. I say so simply because if we have the various plants being shut down in the US,
Yes.
and Brazil, as I gather. Critical plants are being shut down. Chicken is our cheapest source of protein. It makes good sense for us to use this opportunity to boost our production side on the ground in the rural economy.
Yes, boost the rural economy.
Get incomes into the economy, produce real goods, and feed our people at the same time, and save foreign exchange, at the same time, because we have one of our major sources of foreign exchange, tourism, is under pressure, and perhaps even export chicken if we do it very well. So you say that the two things can hang.
Yes.
You may not necessarily be the best and most efficient chicken producer in the world.
Yes.
But you should be able to produce some for yourself. Right. And now is a good time for us to do that, you say?
Yes, certainly it is.
I want to turn to you, Richard. You are very close to the tourism industry, as I gather. This situation provides us with an opportunity perhaps for deepening when we come back, because we have to think of this as a phase. So we will go through this. I don't know how it would look like on the other side in terms of tourism, what will be the protocols in place, but there will be tourism. We have a case now perhaps for us to see how we could deepen the supply side locally to the tourism industry, you think, going forward?
Linkages. Just before I answer that, there is a question I want to ask Janai regarding his response, because I'm a little curious. Central bank, ECCB, now what we see in the rest of the world that has central banks is that they immediately drop their interest rates, their reserve rates, to zero in the case of the States. They pump money, quantitative easing, into the economy, and they make it easy for banks now to lend, by buying all the instruments that are out there, for banks to lend money, to the people that need it. That way the money gets into the private sector eventually, because there is money to lend, etc. Now, we can't do that because we don't have a central bank, that's quite like that, and it certainly doesn't have the depth of a ECB or a Federal Reserve or the Bank of England. But the Prime Minister has mentioned something before, that the currency is 100% reserve, whereas the prudential guidelines say that we should be at least 60%. That means there's a buffer. There's a little bit of room for them to adjust in order not to give loans and buy instruments willy-nilly, but certainly to assist governments to a greater extent. But at the same time, the currency will always be under pressure, no matter how strongly reserved you are, because it's really how the rest of the world thinks about us. And so to that extent, with not the same amount of US dollars being generated in the region, it has put a little bit of pressure. How is central bank going to reduce that reserve ratio as part of its economic strategy?
That has been a perennial issue in terms of how should the reserves be treated with. The operational guidelines speak to 80%, 60% being the lowest you can go, but the bank tries to at least maintain 80%, and of course it's now at close to 100%. Recognizing that there is a need for some injection of funds into the society, it has expanded what it's referred to as its tranche 2, which is what I mentioned earlier in terms of some of the overdraft and other facilities available. I think there is a bit of hesitation in taking the ratio or the backing ratio lower, below that 80%, approaching 70 or 60%. That really is one of those issues that the Monetary Council will have to treat with at some point. I believe where the hesitation is coming from is that you would want to put in place a system that if there is a shock and you respond to that shock by lowering that backing ratio, that there is a system in place for replenishment, and that there is a system in place that buffer can return to an acceptable standard to provide you with some cushion for the next shock. And I believe in the absence of that, you are seeing some of this hesitation to go down that route, as it were. But I think and there will be a crisis after this one. As the crisis comes, as the world becomes more interconnected, you would see more calls for that mechanism to be designed, built out, thought out, and possibly allow us to have that counter-cyclical injection of funds during crisis and whatnot that you are speaking to. So I think in the near future, that is something that serious thought would have to be given to, for sure.
Okay, so I can hold on to my EC dollars in the meantime. That's important, actually, because, in crises, you get what they call capital flight.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing we need. There's pretty much nowhere that's safe in the world. The U.S., money is flowing into the U.S., even though they're going to have a debt to GDP of 200% by the time they finish their stimulus. So everybody's going to, be a little, but the U.S. dollar has become and we're pegged to it. So let's hope we stay there. So your question was, really, are we too dependent on tourism? And in essence, what can we do about the linkages? The answer to the first one is yes. It's one of our weaknesses, not just us. Aruba, for example, 89% of their GDP is tourism, and they're hurting right now. They've had to cut public sector salaries. They've had to, a number of deep changes they've had to make. No change, just no choice. So I don't think it's there's nothing wrong with the extent of tourism we have. It is the fact that there aren't the linkages. Jamaica, for example, 70% of their agricultural produce is bought in Jamaica. In ours, it's 30.
Yes.
And that's one of the areas, that we can really, and this is a golden opportunity, like everything else. Too good of a crisis to waste, and this is it. This is your chance, but in order to make it a realistic thing, just like Paula talked about the manufacturing, that you have to put money into agriculture now to make sure our farmers are properly trained, to make sure there's no stigma against going into agriculture. There is a little bit of commercial agriculture right now, but it struggles. They can sell their stuff, but they have difficulty with the efficiency, difficulty with the skill sets, difficulty with the inputs, and no matter what has been too much of a concentration in bananas over the years, and we've left behind the other side of it. And this is our chance for that side to really and truly come
non-banana agriculture.
So yes, I mean, we have to, we don't want to give up a portion of tourism just to diversify the economy. Far from it.
No.
We want to expand the economy so that now the other sectors will come to the fore. That 30% will become 70%. We will start to produce food not only for our food security, but for our tourism and for local use. And I'm glad to see the produce that is now coming out. And we start to buy the stuff that you can manufacture locally and put, again, small loans so that the domestic manufacturers can get into products that maybe they've stayed away before, but now they might see an opportunity and an opening and get into that. So, but there's one area that we keep not talking about, and it really is going to be our savior in the long run, and that's services.
Yes.
Because
non-tourism services.
Tourism services as well. In other words, it's not specifically related to a cruise ship tour or buying or making something. It's the service to do, just like you described. Services have jumped. Delivery, everything else is coming up. Our young people need to learn how to code so that they can be making programs and becoming, what they call it, social media influencers and make a ton of money. I mean, because one thing this has taught us, the technology allows us to talk to each other, to communicate with the rest of the world, and to do things perhaps we've never done before. Even old people are using the internet now, like me. So to that extent, services will be the biggest sector in the future, even non-tourism. Because if we make the right investments, and I'm not talking about Ojo Labs here, but making sure that our people, whether at school and then training programs afterwards, can get into that on a wider scale. But as I say, yes, we need diversification. We've tried for years, since the bananas, back in 1992 when it started to fade. The EU gave us tons of money to get into other agricultural products. Nothing worked. And tourism kept chugging along. And so slowly but surely people just moved towards tourism and any offset from that. So, how we can diversify that now, we have no choice. It's now being forced on us.
Yes. So it's a matter now of us trying to see real incentives for the agricultural sector, real support in terms of a system similar to what was done for banana agriculture, but that now for wider agriculture. Research, with your research department, like you had the wind bun doing for bananas, your marketing department, like you had now it's called, well, it's just geese. Now it's called Whip Deco. In other words, systems deliberately geared towards providing the
Absolutely.
support.
But to a large extent, it's money as well, because
And
you know,
money.
But
and
agriculture does not need incentives.
Yeah.
Over the years, you never paid a dime if you sold agricultural produce, and there was nothing on the export. So it's not incentives they need. It is essentially money that goes into the education of farmers, the establishment of small farms, and the linkages with the markets so they can get their products out there.
Yes.
Can I just?
Yes, I'll go to the ladies first.
All right.
I beg to differ with you there, Richard, because a lot of the young farmers right now are doing a lot of things computer-wise. So some of your processes on the farm will have to be linked to that. So, and it's becoming more prevalent. I watch some of the beekeepers trying to sort themselves out with the honey, and a lot of that goes that way. So they will need some sort of funding with regards to equipment and different types of stuff that they have to use with regards to getting their farm up to a level.
Great.
And that is key right now, because I'm seeing it a lot. And I'm not just talking about a laptop or tablet. I'm talking about serious equipment where you have to do a lot of testing. Because what we are saying that as a sector, and we say that to our farmers also, no matter what we do, we have to be with a standard. It must be a standard. So when we are finishing producing that product, it is good for local consumption, I'm ready to export it. So every manufacturer have to have a process of going to Bureau standards. You have to have a standard.
Yeah.
No matter you start with the label, you start with the contents, you start with what you put on the label, you must have a standard. So when we are done with that manufacturer or that farmer that works with us, you know that person, the vet needs to go and visit the farm, he needs to make sure this is done properly, and you stick to the standards. Once you are done with that, I'm able to say, hey, let me go to Export Saint Lucia, I'm ready to export. And this is why you're now seeing more persons exporting fruits and vegetables. You're seeing more people, there's a demand for honey like, wow. But unless we can get these guys and ladies set up properly, you cannot export the honey. It must be done properly. So again, that part, as I say, I beg to differ, is just that you'll need some type of equipment for the different type of product that they have to produce.
Maybe we should do like President Trump and say that if you inject yourself with honey, you cure the virus, and there will be a flood. But here's something that you'll be glad about, and to hear anyway as a chicken lady.
I'm not a chicken lady. I'm a manufacturing lady.
In Jamaica, this is an interesting thing. In Jamaica, they produce 100% of the chickens that they consume. 100%. They even have enough to market, to export, but they don't bother because that market is not worth their while. But they produce 100%. They don't import any chicken.
And Saint Lucia could do the same. I want to go to Dr. Samuel.
Yes, one of the things, as Richard indicated, services really, ultimately, is where the future is in terms of our ability to compete on a more even, I feel like, basis. But we need to tap into what is vogue now. If all this business process outsourcing, for example, using digital platforms to provide services around the back office services and so on, to employ large numbers of our people. And thereafter you start to climb up that totem pole in terms of the value chain, where you start having capacity to do some of the higher order technological services in terms of the coding and all the benefits of the intellectual property rights that come with that. So you create these clusters where you become a center for serving different constituencies in the world using that informatics kind of center, which I believe is important for us to take part in the knowledge economy based on digital trade and so on. E-commerce is also another area that I think we have to begin to position the country very much for. Again, all of these things are about using the combination of technology to access or provide services, which takes us to another debate which I want to just mention in passing about whether countries should be charging tariffs on electronic transmissions and whether that would be beneficial to small countries such as ourselves. And there's that debate going on right now. Some people believe we're leaving revenue on the table by not charging that tariff, these taxes. But I argue to the contrary, that I think we have more to gain from having access to that technology and to be able to provide services remotely, what we call Mode 1 services, across border services.
I want to come back to you, Dr. Samuel, but I'm told we need to take a break now. When we get back, I want to speak, Wendy, to you about e-commerce in terms of the support or lack thereof from the banking sector to make it work. And we have no one from telecommunications, but at least we could hear from the banking sector what it takes. And of course, I want us to discuss the whole issue of energy efficiency. If we're going to export, if we're going to be competitive in manufacturing, we need to discuss energy. Well, you're listening to and you're watching a program with the Government Information Service with a panel of persons here discussing the economy of Saint Lucia in the context of COVID-19 now and beyond. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
COVID-19 is a new pandemic disease as declared by the World Health Organization. It is transmitted directly by respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or indirectly through rubbing the face with contaminated hands. There is still no specific treatment or vaccine against COVID-19, and as such, the farming community should adhere to some special recommendations. Stock up on essentials such as animal feed, fertilizers, pesticides enough to last for about 30 days. Stock up on fuel and oils for farm equipment. Ensure that tools and vehicles are serviced to prevent breakdowns and to ensure that farming and food production remains steady. And protect yourself and your workers by ensuring you take all necessary precautions to remain healthy. More than ever before, your important role as gatekeepers of St. Lucia's nutritional health and food security should be taken seriously. When you exercise these precautions, you not only safeguard your health, but also continue to allow St. Lucians access to freshly grown fruits, vegetables, and other local crops. Remember, it is our responsibility to ensure our nation eats fresh, St. Lucia's best.
Welcome back to discussions on the economy and COVID-19. And before the break, we were looking at the whole issue of manufacturing, and Dr. Samuel was speaking to also the issue of services and the role services will play in the restructuring and widening of the economic base of this country. And one of the areas is e-commerce. And I thought perhaps I wanted to get some comments from the banking sector with respect to e-commerce. You might say, why the banking sector? Well, the experience around this part of the world is that before you can get an e-commerce account with a bank, you normally have to have a number of years in business already. 3 years, 2 years, if all your accounts in order. And but if a young entrepreneur is starting an e-commerce business, his business is e-commerce. He is going to be trading online from day one. So he has no previous banking business experience. Wendy, where is the banking sector in terms of flexibility in supporting that part of the economy, which is the future?
Yeah, I think banking is really evolving as we go, and it's evolving at an absolutely unprecedented pace, given the types of industries that we're seeing coming out of the network now. So for example, we would know that the ECCB is heavily invested now in the digital currency, and that is going to be a significant response to that e-commerce, the entire e-commerce sector and how it is beginning to develop. And generally speaking, you can actually access an e-commerce account. The primary requirements from the bank are no different than any other account, and that is to know your customer. Mm-hmm. Every bank, every banker has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that they can produce enough information about a customer if and when they are called upon to do so. Like every other business, and I want to answer this in a very broad sense, to say that it is a wonderful idea to say that we are opening an account or we are going into business. We must be able to say exactly what it is that we hope to accomplish in so doing. And I think generally speaking, a lot of customers ask, why do I need to know what it is that I'm anticipated to do business-wise, income-wise, revenue-wise in a year? How would I know? I've never done it before. But if you don't have a sense of where you want to go to, how do you know that you're succeeding? And I think in our economies, we see a lot of businesses open and fail shortly thereafter because they have not put the thought into what are the threats to the business, who are the competitors, how many competitors are there. And so the bank's role really is to ensure that the customer is also very clear on what it is that the business is expected to produce. The whole question of e-commerce and businesses that operate online is very new to us in the Caribbean. Absolutely, we can do the necessary investigations to see what other businesses across the world are doing and what they look like. But in terms of regulation, we have to ensure, the banking sector has to ensure that we understand the business nature, the sort of revenues that you are hoping to generate before we go ahead and say, absolutely, let's walk through the doors. But I think in terms of educating and having conversations with your bank, that is always the best way to start. If you have an idea, I highly recommend that you walk into your bank and say, this is my thought process, and have someone sit down with you, guide you through. And more often than not, the banks will be able to provide you with historical information on persons who may have had similar thoughts, their own issues, and their successes as well.
Shana, you want to take a stab at this?
Thank you. I think I definitely agree with the point and the whole notion of the digital currency and how that can act as a catalyst towards this e-economy is definitely something to look forward to, both in the near and medium term. I know the bank is putting in place and doing piloting of sort of the regulatory and other systems that would facilitate that. One of the issues that I believe has been holding back businesses is the ease within which they could receive funds for the provision of a service and the manner in which they could have settlement quite quickly. You saw many persons delivering, by way of example, during the COVID crisis, during the lockdown periods and whatnot. So they'll say, okay, I'll come to your home and I'll drop these groceries for you if needs be. When you do, and we have that transaction, how quickly can I settle with you at that point? To the extent that this delivery person does not have a swipe machine, that then is a bit of an inhibitor. So I think the extent to which you could have a sort of digital platform where I simply just tap your phone, you tap mine, and we exchange funds, that I see as a catalyst over the near to medium term, where you could have settlement quite quickly at relatively low cost as well. That definitely would be a platform for growth of that sector going forward.
Absolutely.
I need to ask Wendy a question, because this is the only time I get it. in all the things that banks are doing, and it's very good to hear them working together, because banks notoriously never exchange information with each other. They wouldn't even tell each other how much bad loans they had on the books, but now they do. Why is it taking so long to open an account? We need to get our young people clued into the economy. You need to be able for people to open accounts quickly. And it shouldn't take that much, when the information is there, so that in fact they can participate even at a small level, because that is one of the constraints. It's one of the things that brings our ease of doing business down. And I think now that banks are being forced to work together, I'm sure that you can come up with some kind of formula that works so that you can in fact get that done faster.
Yeah, I think what is always challenging for the bank is, again, know your customer. And the documentation that is required, it is not exhaustive documentation, but somehow persons generally feel that it is, it digs into their private space. But if we were to look at the requirements for insurance, for example, the same documents that are required to show that you are who you are, or you live where you say that you live, your IDs, your government-issued IDs, those are the things that really would slow down the process between one person being able to walk in and get their account opened on the same day and someone who has just not filled in the boxes in terms of being able to provide all of the necessary documentation that the bank is asking for. So we do see significant differences in persons' level of comfort, one, in coming into the bank and having a discussion, but also some people are just very hesitant in providing the information. one of the things that we would say is the bank is held to accountability in terms of protecting your information, and so there really should not be any hesitation in providing, for instance, income tax returns for small businesses. That is one of the areas that always poses a challenge for the banks, that most persons do not file tax returns. But we must be mindful if you are self-employed, so Paula, for your team, an employed individual will produce a job letter, and that is how an income is verified. For someone who is not employed, an employer, a self-employed individual, these are the things that we must see so that we can have the same level of comfort. And so I think there needs to be an entire re-education of the public so that they understand exactly why the banks are requesting the documents that they do, so that we have a smoother sailing process and the bank is able to function the way it is meant to, which is to support the public.
I take a point. I will not belabor it, but I'll tell you this. I went to the United States I was passing through, and in 15 minutes I was able to open an account. 15 minutes.
That's where you put your money?
Just 15 minutes. Oh, I understand. But you see, what happens is Saint Lucians travel. Saint Lucian, like me, other persons travel, and they're able to do that over there. And when the same person comes here in Saint Lucia to open an account, exactly what you said, Richard, they find that they have to go through so many hoops
and particularly if they're from the US.
Yeah, this is really what the difference. I understand that there are a number of regulations you have to meet that perhaps these over there don't necessarily meet.
Correct.
But it really hits you in the face.
Yeah, and I believe that there are definitely steps being taken to address those sorts of issues. For example, being able to set up shared services across the islands so that information is stored and more easily available, and so you do not have to face the same questions from the same banks or other banks consistently. So there are measures being taken, or there are certainly studies being undertaken now to see how we can reduce the challenges associated with. But like everything else, these things do take time. Yeah, but they are.
The government is also working to allow people to use non-fixed assets as security.
Yes.
That is
Movable assets.
Movable and
What's the
immovable
word?
assets.
Movable assets.
Movable
And
assets.
immovable assets.
Which is a big thing, because that's
Yeah.
what most of these young entrepreneurs have. They don't have a piece of land to put up as security.
In the post-COVID environment, this is really what we're looking at, a future with a more diversified economy, so that, yes, tourism has taken a beating, but you have other activities. So I want to come back to you, Dr. Samuel. The whole area of trade and the whole area of the OECS arrangements and the supposed single market space that we have created, where, notwithstanding tourism today and all of the islands being also, most of them to different degrees being tourism dependent, shouldn't we by now have been seeing greater movement of non-tourism activity that would have that should have been used to buttress the fallout from a contraction, as it were, in tourism that we're seeing right now? And what needs to be done?
Yes, you're quite right. At this point in our history, how many years after signing the revised Treaty of Bastille?
1983.
Firstly, in 1983, we would have thought by now there would have been greater uptake, and we would have seen the manifestation of the kind of, the dreams of our forebears in terms of the institutions and so on, both in the private sector. But work has been done, but we are very far from where we would like to be. We have, for example, the OECS Business Council. I think that's a critical organization that needs to be revitalized to cause the private sectors in the sub-region to begin to, sit around the table and discuss the issues. We have, for example, the perennial complaints about even shipping, for example, to move goods. The schooner traffic is clearly absent. Recently I heard some of our major shipping lines that serve the region have decided to consolidate. Now when these things happen, that reduces the number of what's available to us, whether it's hard space or scheduling issues, and that should send a call to us, call to action, that we in the region need to have a response for that. We talk about the ferry service, for example. We've been hearing about the studies that the OECS have done that will move both passenger and what they call goods traffic on the region. And that is still, we are still awaiting that. I heard, I think, some encouraging comments recently by the Prime Minister of Barbados in this regard. I'm hoping that that becomes a reality. But coming back to the OACS sub-region, we need to see the development of what I call pan-OACS firms, where we see some agglomeration, where we build larger, more viable firms. For example, even our retail sector, food distribution. These are some sectors I think I should see presence across the region, but we have not done that. And there are lots of other areas that I think, although we have examples of success, where we should build on these areas where we have success. So
Dr. Samuel, I'm hearing you saying, as we move out of this COVID environment and go forward, we should be seeing OACS companies in the area of distribution, in particular, as a means of ensuring that the goods that are manufactured by companies in the region are actually making it to the front of the shelves in the various member states.
Well, yes, we need to see OACS goods produced in OACS territories more present on the shelves, so to speak, across the member state. That is how we're going to strengthen the region. We need to see even things like shared production arrangements. Now we have Martinique as an associated member. We can see how we can use that for greater good to do things like production integration to get into Europe and so on. These are all of the sort of strategic arrangements that we can seek to take greater advantage of. For some reason, we have not been able to, if you like, square the circle or get the actors to actually take these opportunities. And there is need for leadership. I think there's a vacuum there that needs to, we need someone who is a regionalist, extolling the virtue of regionalism and causing our private sector to take up the mantle. And the COVID experience, I think, has exposed the soft underbelly of these arrangements that needs to be converted into reality, and the people are waiting.
Ms. James, Saint Lucia's bought a lot of toilet paper just after
toilet paper alone,
toilet paper, tissue paper,
my goodness,
cleaning bleach and so forth. To the extent that one of our major distributors ran out of chemical and tissue from outside and had to resort heavily on domestic production. And we've seen, like you say, a number of entrepreneurs coming to the fore in services. Paula, do you believe St. Lucians today are beginning to appreciate a little more the need to have local businesses and to support local businesses? Do you get a sense of that now?
To a point, not totally. Because when I see what was happening with the binge buying and everybody's going crazy with just buying stuff, I don't even think people realize that the toilet paper was all locally manufactured. That company has 4 brand names, including a no brand in one of our largest supermarkets, and it was selling like wow. Nobody realized it's locally manufactured.
Is it a case that meaning St. Lucian businesses have done a bad job of positioning St. Lucia? I'm not speaking about local. I will not endorse that word, buy local. I'm talking about buy St. Lucian. Is it a case that St. Lucians are not buying St. Lucian goods, or the manufacturers of St. Lucian goods are not proud to say it is St. Lucian loud enough that the population could hear?
I think a lot of it has to do with shelf space.
Distribution?
Not distribution, because they can distribute the space on the shelf where you put a product. Because what we have examined and saw, you go to the supermarket today and you'll find a product at the bottom of the shelf. You have been given that much space in the supermarket because they give you shelf space.
Is that a packaging issue?
No, you see, you'll see the product, but it's at the bottom. So 9 out of 10 times you go to the supermarket, you just look on the shelf. So it's eye contact. And then the manufacturers have the problem of constantly having to say, you cannot keep putting my product, you gave me this space, you cannot keep doing this. So they're constantly in the supermarkets with that sort of foe But that is not the reason for goods are not selling and people don't appreciate. Not until something happens is whenever you tell me about poultry, I was in wow when I saw the way people were behaving for the same chicken. And we talk about the price of local chicken. But I keep saying to people, you look at the price, but you must look at the quality. You must look at the texture. There is nothing wrong with our packaging and our quality. Absolutely nothing wrong. Because I say to people all the time, okay, tell me this product. How do you know where it's made, what it's made out of? Because you don't read the package. You don't. So we just pick it up. Okay. But we have this phobia with things made locally is not up to standard. And we've been trying over the years and continue to try over the years to tell people everything made locally manufactured from a manufacturing standpoint from our sector, we ensure that this has a standard. And I'm proud to say they have a standard. A standard that can compete anywhere in the world. Anywhere. And I challenge anybody to come tomorrow and tell me no.
We have to go for a break, but when I come back, Dr. Sandman, I think it is important that you speak to the issue of the challenges that countries like Saint Lucia face before major nations such as the United States, just to have a little space in Saint Lucia to support local businesses, and what it is that the government has been doing and should be doing to encourage that.
You're in the US.
We'll be back in a short while to continue this discussion on the economy in the state of the coronavirus, COVID-19, and looking at this economy beyond.
What's in the food you're eating? Do you really even know? All the chemicals and hormones used to accelerate their growth. All the artificial flavoring, sweeteners and colors too. We consume and we don't spare a thought for the damage that they'll do. No, think about the children. Think about the children. How will we save them? Chemicals and GMOs are not the solution. Use organic and join. Excessive agrochemical use, additives, and genetically modified foods are harmful to health and the environment. Join the good food revolution. Grow, buy, and consume organic. A message from Rise Saint Lucia and the Ministry of Sustainable Development with funding from the GEF Small Grants Program, UNDP. The good food revolution.
Welcome back. We're discussing the economy of Saint Lucia in the face of COVID-19 and what do we do going forward. More importantly, I just wish to say and acknowledge that we have a number of persons following us on Facebook all around the world, and we're getting comments, and we thank you very much for your comments and in some instances questions that would inform the discussions we're having here going forward. But just before the break, I was asking Dr. Semra to give us a sense of some of what countries like Saint Lucia go through to secure space, because a number of Saint Lucians don't understand the extent to which foreign countries and governments actually try to squeeze out local Saint Lucian businesses, manufacturers, literally try to squeeze them out of business from overseas, and the need for Saint Lucians to support Saint Lucian businesses. So I would like Dr. Sandman for you to give us a quick sense and a short synopsis of some of the issues.
There are a number of cases where the U.S. in acting from its point of view in accordance with either some rule or the other, the WTO principle or the other, regardless of size or of country. We saw what happened in the banana challenges when we had the banana trade wars, and we were a third party to a trade war in which that caused a lot of injury and literally decimated the rural economy. We have seen similar challenges to other initiatives on the part of our government to try to ensure some food security, and that was in the case of the poultry sector, where challenges were made to the market sharing arrangement we have, in which some percentage of the import demand or requirement comes from, is first satisfied by buying from local sources. I had the challenge of facing the U.S. at the margins of the U.S. Trade and Investment Cooperation meeting under the U.S. ticker, and where questions were directed to Saint Lucia about that regime. The U.S. had actually taken us up at the WTO. These matters came up in the Committee on Trade and Goods in the WTO. We have received calls from the Barbados office, the U.S. President Embassy in Barbados, challenging our arrangement for poultry meat and even pork. However, in the last meeting, the 8th meeting between the U.S. and the CARICOM in June of last year, when we sat, we were able to convince the U.S. That because of the very situation we're facing, the possible advent of the outbreak of disease, and the need and the public health implications for our country, that we needed to have some capacity in case that our supply is disrupted. We have concerns about kill date, the age of the chicken that we receive, quality issues such as we have been having. So we definitely had a fight on our hands, and we were successful in convincing them on this occasion, the members of the U.S. Trade Representative Office, that we need to have a balance, and we were not discriminating. So we were not violating the WTO agreement. But the point remains that the U.S. will challenge regimes, whether they be small countries or large countries, if they deem it to be in conflict with their private sector interests.
And I think there's a very important lesson here to learn, because when it is now not convenient for that supplier to supply us, because the supply on the supply side in the US, their poultry plants, the processing plants, the people are sick because they have the virus. They have shut down. Whatever is left over must first be used in the US. So they say to you, the persons they were exporting to, I'm sorry, I can't supply you. You're on your own, my boy. And so if you had no domestic capacity, no fallback position, I wouldn't say what we say in Saint Lucia, but this is really where you would find yourself. So it is so important, I believe the message is being drawn home to Saint Lucia, because as we come out of COVID-19, I think the message is coming out that we need to have a more robust domestic economy. And by domestic here, I mean it's not necessarily a Saint Lucian economy, an OECS or wider-based economy that has a deeper linkages in the real sense. Goods and services are moving among each other with the extra layer on it of tourism. But there is a fundamental base that is there. So I think we can't run away from it. And some of the comments from Facebook, our commentators are saying, perfect time to take this opportunity to push agriculture. Firstly, to be self-sufficient and being able to supply the region. I know the islands in the north depend on Dominica and St. Vincent heavily for their ground provisions, and that's on a weekly basis. We also need to improve our fishing industry, moving from these small vessels to larger ones. So you get a sense that people understand there is a need now for us to urgently diversify our economic base, give ourselves greater wiggle room and flexibility. And if we do it well, we will both be saving foreign exchange, and we will also be engaged in our unutilized resources,
excess capacity,
the idle resources we have, especially in the rural community, to put to use. I want us to look, as we go forward, as we try to jumpstart this economy, my good friend Janai, one of the areas that, when you look at your GDP equation, one of the areas is investment. Y, C plus I plus G, X minus M. Investment. Where will investment come from? Richard, think about it also. In the short term, do we see investment coming from outside? If any investment will be taking place within St. Lucia, it most likely come from within?
I think, thanks again for that question. I think one of the things that COVID has brought to the fore is the need for the within St. Lucia economy. We typically think of the economy as St. Lucia trading with the US, St. Lucia trading with the UK, whether it be for the tourism industry, whether it be through exporting of manufactured goods or whatnot. I think what COVID has brought to the fore is that there is an economy within Saint Lucia as well. If I am in Balata, if I am in Abdumon or whatnot, and I want to access goods and services, the delivery of goods and services within the island, between the communities, is an economy in and of itself. And I think COVID has definitely brought that to the fore. And if we are to have investment, I think there is a nexus between recognizing the role technology plays in facilitating that. And if there is to be investment, I think investment in that area, whether it be commercial banking, whether it be equity financing, would be a great area to start. I mean, you saw all of these 758, 759 jokes and what have you, but then we do recognize that each component of Saint Lucia is unique, and trading within and amongst each other is a way to go. If I am up the morning and I want to get produce and I may not want to come to town, is there a service that can just deliver that to me? So I think COVID definitely has brought that to the fore, has definitely made technology important, whether it be schooling via technology, whether it be Zoom calls that everyone has had at least 50 or 40 Zoom meetings over the past few weeks. We are recognizing that there are different modalities to transact with one another. And as we recognize that there are different modalities to transact with one another, the extent to which we use those modalities in and of itself can create an internal economy that I think we have not touched on or spoken to at all.
Any other comments on the investment side? Because the Prime Minister did mention in his address that, and he recognized that, because he said, look, we need to keep stirring up economic activity, investing in, say, I think it was the airport project, continuation of that, to inject and to get people working, and also there was one other project he wants to...
St. Jude's?
The St. Jude's project. What is your...
I'm not going to go on those two. But the problem we have here is that we have a crisis. And some of the things you talk about are great, but they're long-term. We have a short-term fiscal issue facing government, facing the private sector. And in other countries, that is being addressed by governments that pump money into the private sector, banks that are able to lend more because there is more liquidity. We have a serious liquidity crisis. And the private sector is already laying off people in St. Lucia. They have no, or cutting. Because of the fact they're looking down the road and they're saying no money coming in. There's no foreign direct investment for the next 6 months to a year. So they're not going to solve our problem. And the government is going to all the multilaterals to try and get money to come in to meet its fiscal imbalance. But therein lies the tale as to things that need to be done in this immediate period to get the private sector stabilized. We're in this stabilization period now. And the problem is, you know, what the Prime Minister has not been able to outline yet is what the economic stimulus program is going to be. He said that will develop over the next couple of months. But there needs to be a little more certainty as to what it is going to be and how quickly private sector companies in particular can feel that there is something that is going to assist them to continue operations, to diversify, to do all the things we're talking about. We just don't have the time to go and negotiate any longer. And for example, we're getting a pushback from the EU on our offshore business that are making it difficult. And that was a source of investment into St. Lucia. Now it's dried up because of all the conditions and changes that the EU has forced on us. We need to push back on them now. Because Mr. Trump has done, one thing he's told us about this multilateral stuff for the WTO and so on, it makes no difference. He's going bilateral and he's doing America first. So we need to start talking about St. Lucia first and getting some of the things done in the short term. That is where our problem is.
So in this case, I heard Richard say it's not particularly hot on the airport project, but some economists will say to you, in a period like this, that is why government should be pumping money if they have no money to pump into the economy. If you already have projects such as the airport project and the St. Jude's project, which resources have already been allocated for that, shouldn't you be getting these going to do exactly what you just said?
Yes and no, because if you look at governments, the reason why we have high debt to GDP is because of capital projects that are financed by borrowing. And when you look at the projects themselves over the years, the rate of implementation is less than 50%, and the quality of these projects are not that great. And so what happens is, there's a wonderful building they built right in front of me, of my building. I think you may sit in that building. That I don't know, NIC did it, but it's steel and glass. All of it imported capital stuff. There's very little labor component. Now, if the government can assure us that the labor component or the local use of subcontractors and contractors for those two big projects are high, then it's worth doing it. If they are low, it's not worth doing it. Simple as that.
So should the government not now be perhaps looking at those projects and where would it plan to use capital equipment, use labor instead? Dr. Samuel?
No, I think on some aspects of what I agree with what some of what Richard has said, we need to minimize the leakage so we can maximize the money multiplier in the country, the multiplier effect. Because if we have a high level of importation, but the bulk of the resources goes out, we want to have more circulation of that money in our economy. Some of the, although there's some debate still about the modalities, but the attempts to have a social stabilization program that will provide resources or financial support to unemployed workers in transition will help stimulate some activity and take us somewhat towards normalcy, because a lot of that will go to consumption and a lot will go back into small businesses and some of it in VAT revenues to government. So that is a sensible approach. The issue of the how it's financed, I'm gathering there is some issues about how, but I think it's not an insurmountable situation. This is a learning process, you must also say, for everyone, including governments. No one fully knows the script as to how to do this, and as we review things, we will see what's the best approach. But there is a necessity, there is a crisis that needs to be addressed. If we can have some consumption and reduce some of the anxieties that we now have as to the uncertainty of what I'm going to do, how am I going to meet some bread and butter issues, then you can have a project such as the HIA going in to kind of stimulate some confidence in the private sector, to create some employment, and also to take the country back towards its trend path it was on pre-COVID. Okay, so it's a bit of both. It's not one or the other. A lot of times we have this binary thinking of 1 and 0. It's not a very helpful thing. It's more about shades of gray than black and white. So I think it's about how you configure, for example, that project to make sure a lot of Saint Lucian, especially in the South, are involved in the project, you know, with some ownership, and is more impactful. And that is one of the approaches that we should have.
And of course, where we have local investors or local business persons who want to undertake an investment now of any shape, that should be fast-tracked, facilitated, and pushed through as soon as possible to get it done. I mean, I'm talking about now how government reacts, and not talking about the politicians, how the civil servants understand what is required of them now, in terms of if a process would have taken a week, you now need to do it in 2 days, to facilitate where we have possibilities of local entrepreneurs wanting to do something now that requires a process in government. We should be looking at facilitating that even faster. Paula, before we go to, let me say here, we intend to invite you, the public, to take part in the discussions here later on through a call-in aspect of the program. This should be coming on somewhere just about between 5 and 10 past 9. So we will be putting up a number on the screen where you'll be able to call in to you also weigh in and give your views on how we could see some sort of restructuring and going forward, how our economy could perhaps be reshaped to build some greater resilience. Paula, when we come back, because I'm due to go in for a break shortly, I would want us to quickly look at the whole issue of energy efficiency. Because if the private sector, the manufacturing sector, is to become more competitive and to fulfill a more robust role in the economy, people at the end of the day look at prices. You look at the cost of goods. And if we are a high-cost producer, generally our goods will end up costing a little more than what is imported. So perhaps you'd want to speak to the whole issue of the costs of energy as we go forward. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we will have some discussions, and then we'll open the lines for your comments.
Because of how quickly the coronavirus spreads, each new case calls for increased public vigilance. Know what is happening, understand why, and comply. Think of the protocols as war tactics. Personal protection tactics. Keep 6 feet away from others. Avoid riding the bus, gathering on beaches, in bars and shops. Public protection tactics. Quarantine yourself if you feel fluish in case you have been exposed. Call 311 or a respiratory clinic for advice. Country tactics. Partial lockdown. Supermarkets, small grocers, pharmacies and ATMs are accessible before curfew. Total lockdown. Everywhere stays closed 24/7 for a stipulated period. Team tactics. Don't only follow the protocols, be a protocols police. Let's win this.
Together let us win this war. Saint Lucia be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
Welcome back to the program where we're looking at the economy in the context of COVID-19. And as we, in the next few minutes, we'll be opening the lines to some discussion where you can take part and call in. We'll not do that just yet. I wanted to get some reaction from Ms. James here from the Manufacturers Association with respect to energy efficiency. And I also want to go back to you, Janai, also to the Prime Minister's address earlier this evening when he spoke on the issue of the cash constraints that the government faces right now as we go forward, the catch-22 situation they find themselves in. So, Paula?
The highest cost in manufacturing is energy. And over the years, the manufacturers have been speaking with government and the relevant authorities to try and get this looked at and see if we can go. We are surrounded by sun to get some solar. Now, legislation has been in draft. It continues to be in draft over a number of years. And we still can't get this move from, I think it's 5 kV to put on a manufacturing plant. We had the problem with regards, there was no NUC. NUC is now in place. And we still have issues with regards to trying to get this dealt with. And I think it becomes even more prevalent for us now when we see the cost of oil. So we are saying, guys, let us look at it. Let us look at it and see how we can move to the next level. Because if we can use that as a mode of bringing down, reducing the cost of manufacturing a product, it will make the product cheaper on the market. And that is one of our highest costs, and we've been working for a couple of years to try and get government to push to get this legislation amended. And I think that's where we are with that issue right now.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is move with greater alacrity, more haste with pushing this thing. I mean, that is understood as a cross-cutting issue that can benefit and lift all the boats, both in agriculture and in manufacturing. I'm aware that there are a number of initiatives that we are taking now under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, where we have, in terms of our, what they call the national determined contributions, agreed to reduce greenhouse gases, for example, by about 16%. And as a result, we have something called a national energy transition strategy. What that is causing is, causing us to shift to using, at least in the future, more renewables. And so that is important. I think we have set for ourselves by 2030 some 35%, and thereafter a bit more. Countries like Mauritius is one country that is doing a good job in that. I know the geothermal energy is another thing we have been waiting. The country has been waiting with bated breath for quite some time. We have started this thing way back. I'm encouraged. I'm hearing some developments there, but we need to be pushing these areas. We've seen some stuff on the solar front with the solar, or they call it the photovoltaic panels and so on being placed on, I think the OKEU hospital has some generating, and that's causing some savings in terms of fuel. We have some schools, I think, under the climate change cooperation in the Caribbean of Japan, helping some schools that now have also these photovoltaic cells. So we need to do that more widespread. Of course, Lucelec has its 3 megawatt plant in Latuni in Vieux-Fort and so on, and we're hoping that we can use that now to continue and to grow, to reduce our use of fossil fuels. Even now there are small gains already, where the fuel surcharge, well, we have the fuel surcharge going down with oil prices, but also we have a certain amount of energy going back in the grid that would have that prevented us having to import all of that fossil fuel or diesel which we have, and that goes back into the atmosphere. So it is actually already giving us some dividends, but we need to do it so that we can increase our competitiveness in manufacturing and agriculture.
I think the energy matter is critical, and it's one of the things we should use this COVID situation to advance rapidly, so that we could see some dividends. But I want to turn to you, Janai. I want to go back to the Prime Minister's address, because Richard mentioned it earlier on. He said the whole issue of very soon we need to have some sort of idea as to what type of stimulus Saint Lucia will eventually get, so that the private sector gets a clearer sense as to what can be done. The government seems to face some serious challenges. How do you explain where we are at in terms of government revenue and the challenges the government faces?
Okay, thanks for that. Earlier we were speaking to how unprecedented the issue before us is. We were quoting numbers of possible 10%, 18% contraction in terms of GDP. We have gotten some of the April numbers in terms of revenues. Typically in the month of April, the government would have earned just over $100 million in revenues. For the month of April, as at Friday thereabout, we are seeing that we have collected just under $37 million. We had estimated that we may get in the region of $33 million, and we have collected $37 million. So if you were to compare that to where we were in 2019, which was $112 million, we have seen a 60% decline in our revenues. We are expecting something similar in the month of May, and we may see something similar thereafter as well. So in an environment where you're seeing your revenues fall by 60, almost 70% in some instances, there are definitely going to be challenges going ahead. But notwithstanding that, the government has worked with development partners to try to, as much as possible, ameliorate some of these revenue issues. In terms of the International Monetary Fund, we have worked and we are working with them to access funding under their rapid credit facility. Those monies, we are in the final stages of drawing down on that. We are working with the Caribbean Development Bank on a policy-based loan, and that too is at an advanced stage, and we're hoping to draw down on that in the month of May as well. One of the things we discussed earlier was, what is the economic stimulus going forward? What can persons expect? I think in the medium term, on the near term, we definitely recognize that stabilizing your populace that has been displaced is the foundation by which you're going to move forward. And that is why two of the proposals that have been put forward, and we're in the process of launching those formally, would be the unemployment benefits, both to those persons who are contributors to the NIC and to those persons who are non-contributors. Both of these initiatives should launch shortly. We have done a lot of the design work with respect to the criterias and how persons can access those systems. So in the coming days, in the coming weeks, the public would hear quite a bit more about that. Once you have stabilized the populace, particularly those who have been displaced by COVID, your private sector now is saying that they too require some sort of injection, because if the state is seeing reductions in revenue in 60 or 78%, they too are seeing similar reductions as well. There have been several things put forward, and as we discussed earlier, there's several things being tweaked and finalized. In many countries, whether you look at the US, whether you look at Canada, or what have you, what you saw happening was an injection of funds, whether it be by way of loan, whether it be by way of grant. We may have to explore the extent to which you have small, medium, large-scale businesses, and you have similar loan/grant facilities available to firms to treat some of their working capital needs and what have you. And we will definitely work with the international community and with the banking system to facilitate those sorts of injections. Now, granted, given where the state is, the extent and the size of these would not be near what you have seen in other markets. But stabilizing your populace that has been displaced by COVID, and also assisting your firms in meeting some of their working capital needs and what have you, will definitely form key tenets of a economic stimulus going forward.
So Richard, you have some sense now as to the elements that you'll be hearing a lot more of very soon.
I get a sense, but it's the specifics I'm dying to get, because I'm saying every day that we operate, first of all, a lot of us can't even get back into commercial activity. It's kind of, bit by bit, and I understand that. It's a health issue. But when we do get back, and a lot of us are learning to work from home, which is an excellent thing. When we do get back, then we're faced with some brutal realities, and that is where the certainty is necessary. We've seen what's happened in other parts of the world, and that's what makes people, a little worried. And we understand that government doesn't have the ability to pump money in like they might have in other countries. But there's not, there's all kinds of ideas that are coming up, and the problem is we don't know what's happening at your level. There are committees that are dealing with these things, but there's not enough transparency. There's not enough clarity as to what it's likely, where it's going, what our options are, what our limitations are. We don't have a lot of options. That's what we know. Yeah. So we're not going to be able to borrow tons of money from IMF or CDB or and so we now have to figure out how we're going to sort this out ourselves. Nobody else is going to come to our rescue, and that's where the problem is, and that's what's making people worried.
I think we have had some fairly robust discussion, and we have examined a number of issues. There are a number of other issues that we would like to touch on, but we believe it is also fair that in a program like this we give the public a chance to weigh in. So I think you have a number on your screen. It is 468-2162. You may call in and pose a question that we will try our best to answer. Do we have a call now?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. Good night.
Hi, good evening, gentlemen.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, I must compliment y'all. This is a wonderful show, albeit I find it a lot to take into one night. It should have been spread over, say, a day or two or some other show, but nonetheless, it's a good effort. I see you have a panel that includes the banking, the ministry, the accounting, and the industrial sector. My concern is we have to recognize that running Saint Lucia on basically a tourism-based industry alone is not really helping us. It's showing us now all the problems that pre-existed COVID is now coming to the fore. Yes, we say we're moving forward, but are we moving forward with having the financial services sector be prepared to reduce the hardline approach in funding small businesses, the industrial sector especially? Now, I have always had the conclusion that Saint Lucia, based on size, population, we have more banking facilities, we have more financial services than we really need. And a lot of them are competing within a limited space.
So I will ask you, I don't want to interrupt you rudely. I just want to say the question you want to ask is whether there'll be changes to accommodate.
Whether the financial services sector will be prepared to be more accommodative, particularly in the industrial sector.
Okay, sir.
Grow that sector.
Okay, thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, but if you just allow me to finish off, I know it's going to be.
Yes, we want to take as many questions as possible.
Yes, I understand. But one of the factors we have is that we have an institution as the Development Bank, which in my opinion is supposed to be really based in the industrial sector. And we should streamline that area so that they could really be a seed funding or industrial-based financial services sector and agriculture, and take out some of the portfolios which put them in direct competition with the mainstream banks.
Okay. Thank you very much. The question really is, what more can be done for agriculture, for manufacturing in terms of financing, and his observation that perhaps the Saint Lucia Development Bank should focus its attention more on the manufacturing and agriculture side, and where there is perhaps some level of commercial type activity hived off to the commercial banks. Any response, reaction, Wendy?
It's difficult. It's a little bit, and I do appreciate the question, so let me acknowledge that firstly. It's a little bit difficult to state exactly how the banks are going to respond. Suffice it to say, however, that I do believe that the banks are all very cognizant of what is happening in this very fluid period of COVID-19. Having put the moratoriums in place now, and having now to particularly pay attention to the portfolios as they stand, it is difficult also to determine when the effects of COVID-19 will be relaxed, when we will begin to see business as usual, and the banks being able to ramp up their business to what is the norm for them. I don't think, however, that it's any firm measure to assume that the banks will not come together to make a determination as to what the industries and the various sectors' needs are going to be. And I think we did mention earlier, First National, for example, had already begun to invest heavily in the microfinance sector. I think we will begin to see some ramping up, at least of discussions as to how best we can support the various sectors, not only agricultural, but generally speaking, to assist with the diversification efforts.
And just to add to that, earlier we were discussing about a regional effort. I know there were efforts by the World Bank to work with the other islands and have a partial guarantee scheme. The extent to which that have been able to get off the ground has been a bit limited, but systems like that are now more important than ever, because then the banks are facing a clear risk in terms of trying to get bankable projects in an environment such as this one. So schemes such as the partial guarantee scheme that was spearheaded by the World Bank, it is a regional initiative. Those sorts of initiatives definitely need to be strengthened, bolstered going forward to assist the banking community.
Excellent. We have another call. Yes, good night.
Yes, good night, Mr. Preble. Gentlemen, good evening. A very interesting discussion. But unfortunately, Mr. Preble and co., this has been a talk shop we've been having for over the last 20 or 30 years when we first started talking about agricultural diversification. The bottom line is production costs in Saint Lucia in almost every sector has been very high and making it difficult for farmers, manufacturers to really compete in a regional and international market. So with all the talk here, what are you doing to get that implemented? Get the practicability of your recommendations and your points of view brought down to the average farmer and grower to serve as an incentive for him to come out into agriculture or whatever. We have seen the honey business failing time after time because of lack of stimulus. We have seen pig farming crumble and so many other similar organizations. In 1996, a group of exporters, traditional exporters, got together to go to England to discuss farming and export of traditional, non-traditional products. They had a paper prepared for government, and nothing came out of it. From about 20 OECS exporters, you have only about 2 or 3. And this was an area that brought in a lot of high exchange, foreign exchange to Saint Lucia. This has fallen. So despite all your talking, what exactly are you men of influence? What can you tell the powers that be to go out and implement stimulus packages to make it practicable for them to come in with at an organized profit?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. I don't know that anybody on the panel could answer this question directly, except to say I am sure that the Ministry of Agriculture would have heard you loud and clear. I'm sure that the Export Saint Lucia would have heard you loud and clear, and that in the context of a situation where it is clear you need to build domestic capacity, build your domestic base, that your observation, which is true, would be taken up and perhaps treated with the level of seriousness that it deserves. So, caller, I can only say this panel don't have the answer to your question. As you quite rightly said, it was a matter that has to be followed up by certain other authorities. We have another call. Good night.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Gentlemen, madam, very good evening to you. Very interesting show. I want to make some reference to an earlier comment made by Mr. Prevel. I believe he asked a question about where is the injection or the investment is coming from. Now, one thing that has bothered me a bit about this whole stimulus package is the fact that it seems to be concentrated or majored on the G aspect of the GDP formula, government expenditure. Okay, but what about the investment? There is, I believe, the last time I checked, savings in the central bank in the name of Saint Lucia exceeded $3 billion. And I believe that only referred to deposits, fixed deposits. I'm saying maybe this is the time when the government and all the officials need to try to get us on solutions to understand that this is the time for us to bring some monies out of our savings, this massive savings, into the investment pool to save this country. Because by extending government expenditure, you are also doing another damage to the country. Because if those high loans, government loans, it is going to impact negatively on the country because those loans are to be paid. And if revenues are not going to grow, how can they meet their commitments? So I believe it is the time for us to be bold. Let us confront this elephant in the house. Ask the people of Saint Lucia to let us start withdrawing from our savings, investing some way or in another. Whether it is a small business, you help recapitalize a small business, get those savings up into this economy. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I need not even have to add to that, but to say this is the sort of entrepreneurship mindset we are looking for, as opposed to hunkering down and getting into our holes. We should be looking at what do we have to work with right now. We have some resources in this country privately. Can we not put it to good use right now? And I think this is the sort of feel that you're getting from. Yes.
The answer is yes, and he's right. There's a huge pool of funds that are there available, and right now they're not getting much of a return on it because there was just too much liquidity. So the question is, how do you get, first of all, a better return? How can you ensure that the risks are not too high for people to invest? And there's been some discussion of having like a national bond or a COVID bond that might allow people to invest. And you have to allow it so at small levels as well. You can't get the kind of investments where people have to put in 10,000 and so on. But there's always going to be risk. And even if a government is kind of guaranteeing it or backing it, there's no guarantee that there cannot be problems down the road. But I think that, just as people bought shares of the bank and the electricity company in the early days, there might be a feeling of they're doing it for the country as well. There's a hope for good return, and the risk is not as great, and so we can start to use, again, our own resources to get ourselves out of what is the problem we have here.
That's something I recommended. I suggested also on one of the famous Zoom calls. I said, this is an opportunity, because I remembered Sir John. I told somebody I was in the bank when it happened. He needed to raise funds for some project, and he came in and offered bonds to the citizens. But there was a minimum limit, a minimum amount. I think it was between 3,000 and 5,000 you could have taken. And I said to the government, why not try that? If you can do at least 20,000 deposits of 5,000, that's $50 million. And that money, you can use it to help rejuvenate the economy without having to hurt your head about where would I find this, do I take another loan? You can give it to some of the small business persons that are closed right now to help them restart their business at a particular rate, and then stagger the payments within, let's say, maybe a 3-year bond or a 5-year bond to give you enough time to start your economy to start to circulate, and then you'll be able to cushion yourself for that fund. That was something I thought of, and it came to my mind when I remembered Sir John, because that's exactly what he did.
Excellent. We have another caller. Good evening. Hi, good evening.
Good evening to the panel as well.
Yes.
I must say this is a very interesting program, and I've been listening and putting the across in my mind as far as the economic standing of Saint Lucia is concerned. And I know that people have been saying that the government have been engaged in a lot of reckless spending, and it is so clear that right now COVID has revealed a lot of things. And one of the things that COVID has revealed to us is the point that we have to look inward. We have to now look into our country and see how we can support local businesses, small businesses, because that is what will create and generate employment in this time. And I believe that the government have not been given enough support to local businesses, small businesses, etc. The government focus have always been too much about looking for outside investment to come into the country, and now we're paying the price. Now, I want to ask a question, and I hope somebody can answer. Those persons who are presently unemployed and they are not able to even pay their utility bills, their electricity and their water, etc. If the government is providing some support for NIC through unemployment, and I think they should have that as a benefit going forward, to have an unemployment benefit for people, because this is what they're actually doing right now, instituting that. And that has never been on the card for NIC to serve and give people unemployment benefits. So I think this is a time for us to include that on the NIC list of benefits. Now, the people who are getting benefits from NIC, call it basically, as the Prime Minister said, all we need now is food. So people cannot be expected that little money that they'll be getting from NIC to pay bills. Now, people's bills are piling up on them. At the end of this crisis, whether it takes 3 months or 6 months, and these bills are piling up on poor people, who will bail the poor people out of this? Will the poor people be stuck in that hole of owing Lucilec and Wasco thousands of dollars, probably in utility bills that have been accumulating over the month? What's going to happen to this kind of bills? Will these things be forgiven? Will these people be starting fresh when the virus is declared over and we in the all clear? And they just start back paying their bills fresh again, and all those back bills that have been piling up on them, what's going to happen to that? Yeah. These are some of the issues that people are concerned about, and nobody's addressing this. Not even the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister is not giving no clarity on these issues, because the banks offer moratorium. Yes, if you have to pay your loan an extra 6 months after this thing is over, if they give you a 6 month moratorium. But what about your electricity bills, your cable bills, your internet bills from Flow and Digicel and Lucilec and Wasco? What's going to happen to those bills that are piling up on poor people right now?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller, for this real question. And this is the purpose we have the phone-in aspect of this discussion, so that people would hear the rest of the public, the public service, the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition. Everyone could hear some of the critical issues that the people in this country are facing, and so that they could find the collective will to come together to see how they could provide some sort of answers. Yeah, but with respect to the piling up of bills, Janai, any response?
I think we have had discussions both with the banking, the insurance, and some of the other components of Saint Lucia. One of the things that has come up in those discussions is problems exactly like this. How do you sort of amortize the build-up that may or may not occur? There have been discussions as to whether you have longer payment plans for these, whether these incur any interest on what have you. And there's also been discussions as to the extent to which persons may have to increase slightly the contribution to some of their loans and what have you, so that they could amortize those within the same amount of time. So definitely going forward, I think more clarity will be brought to that issue. I think it's a very pertinent question, it's a very real question, and it definitely calls on all actors, whether it be your banking system, your insurance companies, the state as well, with respect to doing one of two things. In the first instance, recognizing that this is an issue that many persons would face, and in the second instance, also recognizing that how we pay for that. And I think going forward, we'll definitely need to have payment options to treat with that issue. You would not, or there is not an expectation that all of these expenses can be met in one shot, as it were. So these are things that are definitely being formulated. The discussions that we have had with the banking system to date have been very frank, very open. And in our discussions with the banking system, one of the things government has been mindful of is any sort of crowding out, as it were. So we are very mindful of the capital position of banks, the stability of banks, and ensuring that any interaction or any interaction by the state is mindful of those concerns as well.
I know we have just about 2 minutes left on the program based on what the producers are indicating to me there. I don't think we have any more calls on the program, so what we shall do now is, more or less go into a closed down phase of this program. First of all, I think the last caller's points were, he expressed what is really happening on the ground with respect to people's fears and uncertainties and concerns. How will I pay? Even if I don't pay my Lucidec bill now, in 3 months or 6 months' time, and I'm still not working, how do I pay it? So I think, Janai, you've mentioned the whole issue of how the banks have come together, but some of the statutory corporations also would have to come forward with some sort of indication to at least give people in these positions a sense as to what it is that is likely to happen. So as we wind up on the program, I would like to just give every one of the panelists a sense, an opportunity to speak to going forward. What are some of the things you'd like to see happen, or you think you could commit to in terms of the banks, to move our economy along the lines of some path of recovery post-COVID? I'll start with you, Dr. Samuel.
Mr. Moderator, before you move there, I just want to ask Shania a question. 30th of April, the government has said tax returns need to be sent in.
Yes.
A lot of agencies and companies that you have to get your data from, your information, so that you can send in to Inland Revenue, is closed. How does somebody do a tax return without the hard data? And insurance, for example, you have, the banks have reopened now, so they can send you stuff. Are they prepared to accept scanned documents, because the bank actually scanned the document and sent it to me, so I have to use that? So what happened to the other things that I have to get from insurance companies, for example?
I think most of your insurance and other companies have, as much as possible in a short amount of time, tried to have e-platform services to treat with those issues. This is something that has brought to the fore the need for more of our institutions to have those platforms. And I think going forward, some of the teething issues that stem from this and related issues from COVID will be treated with. I know that the Department of Finance and Inland Revenue understands the situation, and there would be some forbearance brought to bear in terms of how persons bring in those returns, and if there are issues with missing deduction claim forms and what have you. So some of that forbearance would be brought, and I know the Inland Revenue Department would work with persons to ensure that over the next few weeks and what have you, all the relevant documentation is provided. So I'd advise persons definitely to continue and to apply to submit their returns if possible, and to continue working with the Inland Revenue Department. They stand ready and they understand the situation and the realities on the ground as well.
So Dr. Samuel, any final comments?
Well, certainly this COVID-19 pandemic is basically takes us to a point of inflection, a point of where we as a country now need to look towards each other. It's a time for us to, as our 40th anniversary of independence says, to be all in on this journey. to secure our future. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and we need not panic. We need to be calm, but we need to work judiciously in a sensible and responsible manner. We are facing a dark hour, and it's the time for us to be patriotic. There needs to be national solidarity, and not for us to run from the challenge. Okay, but we will get through this. I believe. I'm an optimist to some extent. And if we implement some of the prescriptions that we have discussed, some of them are more medium to long term, but that will give an idea how to reposition our economy to mitigate the effects of future shocks, which will no doubt come. But there are some encouraging signs that I am seeing. Even now, and things we can take advantage, like fuel costs, for example, is low, and that I think will reflect and give some relief. But we must all take responsibility. I think one of the lessons for Saint Lucians is now how to manage finances going forward. They need to have discipline, things like personal savings, and make some judicious choices about how to deal with their income. Some of our expectations are really first world expectations. They are not expectations of a third world country that has the challenges that we have of high debt, low productivity, and the other challenges. We have to temper our expectations and our reality to suit our reality. This is about our country. And so I remain optimistic that we will pull through. And I would like to thank all our viewers for their calls. And I hope that we can have more discussions like this where we can share with our public and our friends and family as to how we can come together and solve this problem.
Paula, any comments?
I would just like to appeal to Saint Lucia to come out and support our local producers, manufacturers, and farmers. They have phenomenal products with standards, quality, and taste. And I can guarantee you going out there and support them, I think, will help Saint Lucia a lot better in trying to withstand this COVID virus, because your monies will be staying in Saint Lucia. It will be easier for you to be able to access your product, and it will help us with regards to rejuvenating the economy.
Can I?
I definitely want to echo the sentiments of the previous panelists, but I think what COVID has really brought to the fore is the need for social safety net systems. I think persons have now recognized that unemployment insurance and making contributions, registering and being part of the formal economy, as it were, does have its benefits. We are very analog, we are very informal, and some level of formality, some level of registration is required going forward, and that would provide that sort of safety net that would underpin how we treat with matters like this. And matters like this would come hopefully in the distant future, but we are going to see instances like this, and it's definitely a wake-up call for large segments of our society.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to have sat here this evening. I do want to say that COVID has certainly presented us a situation which forces us to recognize that this is a multi-sectoral issue. This is not a health crisis. This is a multi-sectoral issue that does not respect boundaries. And as such, we have to be creative and innovative within ourselves in order for us to begin to take a step forward. I think coming out of the calls this evening, quite clearly our populace is very sensitive to what needs to happen for us to get back on our square footings. And it is not a situation where any one sector is the answer. The banking sector has a role to play, absolutely. I think that our goodwill in stepping forward in presenting what we believe to be the best case scenario and options for the people in the initial circumstance is a clear indication of that. However, every sector and every one of us is equally responsible to being creative. I think Mr. Samuel spoke to the fact that we must manage our expectations. We must manage our own balance sheets and make the necessary adjustments to become part of the answer to this global issue. And with that, I thank you. One other thing, on Friday next week, you can look forward again to seeing Mr. Peterkin and myself, along with the legal sector and the regional banking sector, providing some more insights into the issues that face the society in general.
Excellent. Richard?
Well, I can't say I'm an optimist at this point, but I am a realist. and listening to some of the calls and some of the comments I'm getting on my Facebook, not all of which are great, You know, one of the things that comes out to me is that what this has brought out over the last month, first of all, heroes that we probably didn't even know about that have come to the fore in the way they've handled it, like Sharon Belma George and Sharon Gardner and so on. And that's excellent. And then a number of people that have put forward suggestions and comments, all meant to be positive, criticisms that are meant to be constructive, like Jimmy Fletcher and Stephen King earlier this afternoon, like Adrian Auger in the Senate when he spoke about NIC, about Anthony Bristol, who called me with a number of good suggestions as to how government could raise revenues, like increasing the VAT to 15%, like a 5% levy on salaries. Like Jane King, who sent me an article on the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu, in Guyana, or British Guyana, they called it then. So if nothing else, it's energized people, it's energized young people. They're out there on social media, they're on the talk shows, they're coming up with solutions and ideas, they're expressing the concerns and the angst that they have. They're worried, and they need solution, and there needs speed in dealing with the issues. We can't wait, and we can't continue to talk. We have to do like has been done in other countries and make decisions and hope that they'll work and correct them as you go along. But we have to move quickly.
Well, it's left for me to say thank you very much to all my panelists. Excellent interactions and contributions, and if I say so myself. And I really want to thank our listeners and our viewers out there, your comments, our persons on Facebook with their comments, and our callers who gave us a real sense of reality in life as to what are the concerns that they have facing, that they're facing in an economy such as St. Lucia's. I think it's my view that this is a great opportunity. In spite of all the downsides, this is an opportunity for us to restructure our economy, to put it on a sounder footing. It'll take the support of every single one. It'll take the criticisms of some so that the critique of some, so that we could refine our thinking. But at the end of the day, we should be seeing ourselves as a better nation, a stronger people, a people with perhaps greater purpose, with greater priorities organized and set. But more fundamentally for me, we should see a people identifying themselves as a people and supporting their people first as they restructure the economy. I want to say thank you very much for your patience and for your forbearance and for your participation, and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.